Bad Apples by Michael Long. A tide of red poured through the arch entrances of the stadium. I watched big red foam fingers, red mugs, red shirts, red shorts, and tens of thousands of red baseball caps. The red is a bright red, almost fluorescent, bold and brash like the people of my great state. My father stands next to me. He has a red sweater with Indiana University written tastefully beneath a small emblem on the breast pocket. My grandfather prefers to advertise his allegiance with greater flair, lest any low-flying planes or satellite reconnaissance photography might not immediately identify him with Indiana University. He wears an Indiana University sport coat, a bright crimson red and white flower on the lapel, and matching crimson golf pants. "Clarence Long, class of '42, he says, shaking hands and slapping the backs of equally crimson seniors. "Our boys are giving him a hell of a time. Sure, they got a hot shot or two, but when the roosters come home to roost, you're going to have to give it to our boys. This is my grandson, Mike." He places his hand on my back, and I reach forward for another firm handshake. My grandfather peppers his speech with metaphors and similes that were popular in his Indiana farmland youth. His love for great comparisons and catchphrases also reveal his 85 years in the Republican Party. When a woman reaches a certain age, she's getting long in the tooth. He still talks about the bad apples in the Democratic Party that want to make us all communists, and he occasionally shouts, "Love it or leave it," across the dinner table when I don't agree with something about the government. The Republican Party is his first great love. My grandmother, his wife of 65 years, and Indiana University basketball are the other two. My grandfather refuses to use profanity. This puts him at a serious disadvantage when cheering for a sports team in the state of Indiana. He substitutes profanity with an odd and strikingly resourceful combination of rural insults. The referee gets an earful each time he's on my grandfather's side of the floor. "Get your dang-nab head out of the clouds there, big boy, and blow that stinking whistle once in a while." Or, "You couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with a milk cow that's still calving," he yells at an opposing player. Like many families across the state, Indiana University basketball is something of a long-cherished tradition, or mass psychosis, depending on your perspective. Hours are spent debating players, strategies for upcoming games, and, of course, the genius of Indiana University basketball coach Bobby Knight. Bobby Knight put Indiana University on the map with his 3 national championships and his pathological aggression towards officials, players that miss free throws, and everyone in a 100-yard radius when he loses a game. It is hard to believe that a man who spends so many hours a year drooling, red-faced, and comparing referees' mothers to any number of animals could not only be accepted but idolized by sellout crowds. Bobby Knight has one redeeming characteristic. He knows how to win basketball games. And what's more, he knows how to inspire young men not only to win the basketball games, but to occasionally do their homework in the meantime. There's another reason I hate Bobby Knight. I cringe every time I entered a job interview in California or New York. It says here that you graduated from Indiana University. Now, is that correct? Yes, it is. Now, Indiana University, is that somewhere around Idaho, or do I have that the other way around? No, it's by Chicago. It's actually 3 hours from Chicago, but I think this reference makes it sound more cosmopolitan. That's where Bobby Knight coaches, isn't it? I don't know. I don't really follow that kind of thing, I say, lying sheepishly. Didn't he get arrested after he raped someone and then hit her with a chair? Oh, I think you have it mixed up. He got arrested in Puerto Rico for hitting a cop. He didn't rape anyone, but said that women should enjoy rape if they have no choice, and he threw a chair at a referee. And all this happened in Iowa? Indiana, I reply. It always amazed me that the Indiana University Board of Trustees never realizes that the majority of the national television footage from their school looks like an outtake from an episode of Cops. While Bobby Knight may be a pariah amongst sports writers, feminists, and the inhabitants of most metropolitan areas, he is considered something of a patron saint in Indiana. His antics are not only accepted, but celebrated. His firm discipline and offensive sound bites are just the guiding hand that young men need. So the logic goes in a state that considers wooden ducks to be an important export. My grandfather absolutely loves Knight. "Bobby's out there giving him hell again," yells my grandfather as Knight runs screaming across a packed arena, his face as red as his crimson sports coat. My grandfather's attitudes and opinions are from another age, as is my grandfather. It seems that at 90 years old, people will more easily forgive his frequent outburst. My grandfather grew up on a farm in Hartford City, Indiana, during the Depression. I've been to the farm. My grandfather still owns it. It is hard for him to give it up, considering his own grandfather cleared the land sometime shortly after emigrating from Germany. My grandfather's parents spoke only German up until the Second World War, when the family suddenly and inexplicably became Dutch. Despite my grandfather's frustrations with my less puritanical political affiliations, he still loves me. He calls me from time to time to ask me about the weather in Seattle and to inquire into Washington State's agricultural exports. "So what type of weather are you getting out there?" "It's sunny and a little breezy," I reply. "Boy, I'll tell you, I could sure use a little rain out here. Now tell me, what are they growing out there in Washington?" "I don't know for sure. I think it's mostly apples and maybe potatoes or something." "How's the apple crop doing this year? It's not too sunny out there for those apples, is it?" I live in downtown Seattle and program computers in a corporate office park, but I always assure my grandfather that, as far as I know, the apples are doing just fine. This seems to reassure him. Whatever else happens in my life, I won't go hungry with that bumper crop of apples. My grandfather makes these calls not because he is actually interested in apples, but because he wants to talk with me and needs something to talk about. He doesn't understand much about my life. He understands that I work with computers and that I try to write stories. He also understands that I have not been particularly successful with either of these professions at times, and that worries him. My grandfather manifests his concerns about my future and offers to help me with my job. "You should let me take a look at your internet. I think I might know something about that type of thing. We had an internet back behind the barn in '58 till your uncle and his friends were monkeying around back there and ended up mucking it up. Are you sure that you put that transmission fluid in?" I still have no idea what he is talking about, but I assure him that if I need help, I will try the transmission fluid. I find these suggestions endearing not only because of the obvious naivete, but because of their genuine spirit of concern. It is his way of trying to help me, and if he could, I'm quite sure that he would put some transmission fluid into my internet, and things would be okay.